welcome back. I'm Carly.
And I'm Kimberly. We are the Book Twins.
Alright, so the book we're going to talk about today is one that...
Super hyped.
Super hyped. It's all over TikTok and BookTube.
And...
So, it is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab.
Yes. I've seen so many different reviews of this book, like whether on Book Talk or BookTube and stuff like that. And so we have a little sister who she
does everything that TikTok tells her to do, essentially.
Yes.
And so she was all very much like, we have to read this book. We have to read this book. She's 14, by the way, and this was very much not a teen book. It's not a YA book.
It was very interesting.
And she loves romance, by the way. She loves her fairy tale happy endings.
And she was, if you were to ask her before she read this book, she would have told, oh, I'm going to love it. Obviously, awesome. It's amazing. And Carly and I just looked at each other like,
okay, we'll see.
Okay. And so I read it first, actually, and I'm like, I'm actually really curious because it doesn't look like the type of book that she would like, but I could totally be wrong because I've never read it before. So I read it, and I appreciate the book. Like, I very much enjoyed it, but as I talked to her, I was like, and I talked to Carly before, I was like, there's no way she's going to like this book. No matter how determined she is to love it, it is just not fit within what she absolutely loves. And so it's interesting to see what she thought, and at the end of it, she's like, yeah, I still liked it. Didn't end how I wanted. And I was like, okay. Sticking to her guts about knowing that she would like it, I guess.
It took her a long time to finish it, though, because I think she was having a really hard time getting through it.
Right.
But when she read it, and then I read it after she had finished it, and I really liked it, too. But it was very, because it's not one of those, like, action-driven either, though. It's very much, so it follows very much the one character, and as she's going through, so she's immortal, essentially, and as she's going through, learned how to survive. This girl from, it's like the 1700s or something in France.
She's born in France.
No, she's born in the late 1600s.
Okay, so she's born in the late 1600s in France, and essentially, this is going to be spoilers. So we're just telling you what we think. We assume you've already read it.
So spoilers.
Okay, so she was born in France, and she essentially was supposed to get married to this guy she didn't like. She didn't want her life to be dictated to her as a woman in that century, which, totally agree. And then she basically made a deal with the devil, and it kind of went awry. And so as the story then progresses, she can live forever, and she can choose and make all the choices herself. But, of course, whenever you make a deal with the devil, there is some unforeseen consequences that you didn't know that he, snuck into the contract, essentially. And so her curse, or her boon for life, or whatever you want to call it, is every person that she meets only remembers her when she's in their presence. So when she leaves, they forget everything about her. And that included her parents. That included anybody she'd ever met ever in her life. So she has gone centuries with nobody ever remembering who she is. Right? And so that's her curse.
Right. So the dark god in the book, he's trying to get her to give up, essentially, and just say, I've had enough, I'm done.
I want your soul, essentially.
Yeah,
right?
So she traded her soul, and she's very stubborn with it.
She's very stubborn. She's adorable. I love little Addie LaRue, because she's like, heck no, you basically tricked me. I'm not letting you win in the end, never.
Even though there are points where she's like, I hate this, but I'm not giving up. And the thing about it is, too, is he also took away her name. So she could never say her name to anybody. All these people that she'd met who would forget, she couldn't even speak her name. So she takes on these random names, because that's just how she's learned how to survive and how to steal and how to live. So she can't even own anything. Everything that she tries to accumulate or own, just something happens, and it gets lost, or she loses it, or she gets kicked out, or something.
Right. I mean, you can't sign a contract for any kind of house or apartment if the person that you sign the contract with forgets everything about you as soon as they leave your presence. And so it is very problematic for her. And so she's very much a nomad in her life. Nobody remembers her, and she doesn't have any kind of identity because she can't use her own name.
Yeah.
And so it's a very philosophical book, right? You're thinking about what is important to life. You can live forever, but you also can have no human relationships. You can't have any human things. You can't keep anything. So is life really worth living? And so it has a very philosophical feel in a story, which is the best way, right?
Yeah, and as time goes on, she's learned how to, plant ideas in people's heads. So it's, their own ideas. So it's not her telling them, but they've remembered bits and pieces enough where she feels like she's learned how to leave a mark without actually leaving a mark.
Yes. Like, for example, she will find artists who will paint pictures of her, and when she leaves, the artwork is still there. Even though the artist has no memory of who the person was, he just like, oh, that was my muse. I must have either, came up with it in a drunk stupor, or I must have forgotten, or whatever. Her footprint is still there. And so that's kind of how she, like, thwarts the devil, right?
Right.
And she's like, in your face. And her spunk is quite fantastic, I must say.
Yeah, it's fun. And so she's lived for centuries like this, and then she ends up in New York in 2014, I think it is.
I think so, yeah.
And she's gone to the habit of she just steals things. Because, of course, as soon as she's out of the site, they don't remember, right? So she's in a bookstore, and she steals a book because she doesn't have any money to pay for it. And the bookkeeper remembers. Mm-hmm. For the first time in centuries, he remembers her. And that's kind of where, like, things really take off in the book.
Yes. And the beginning is a little bit on the slower side because you're like, okay, I understand the premise behind this book and her curse. She's just kind of like a nomad going through life. The book is also divided up by chapters in different time periods and different places. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of has a It
doesn't have a linear...
there's no linear path.
Yeah.
Right?
That's how you say it.
No linear path to the book. And so as the reader, because the book is, Addie's life is like that. And so the reader writes like that. So the writer writes like that. So you as the reader are kind of experience that through the writing. And then you get to a part, and this is like a third way into the book, maybe halfway into the book. I feel like it's very far into there. You're like, okay, where are we going? Because this whole book can't be like this. And then you meet this character who remembers her. And that's where it really starts to take off. You're like, oh my goodness, she can have a real human relationship with this guy.
Which she hasn't had a relationship with anyone other than this dark god since this whole curse started.
Mm-hmm. And she doesn't know what to do with it. It's miraculous. It's marvelous for her, and she is living every single moment. And there is a twist in there with him because he also made a deal with the devil. So it was like, she's like, oh my gosh, I found a loophole with the deal with the devil. And unfortunately, he made a deal with the devil. And so that's why their paths crossed and he was set to die. And it gets really muddy and crazy.
And it doesn't have your typical ending of what you would think. It doesn't have the fairy tale ending. And so for me, that made the ending not predictable. Because as you're reading, I'm like, if it feels predictable, like, oh, they're just going to find a way to be together and the end. And it doesn't end that way.
But at the same time...
I appreciated just because I couldn't, throughout most of the book, I couldn't really tell where it was going.
Right.
And I appreciate that it didn't end.
Yes. I feel like, yes, it didn't have a predictable anything, honestly. Right? But I did appreciate, so she falls in love with, I can't remember his name. Henry. She falls in love with him, and she comes out to later. She's open with him, and she comes clean with him about everything in her curse. And then he comes clean with her about his curse. And she comes to find out that he doesn't have very much longer to live because he made a deal with Luke as well. That's the name. That's the name the devil goes by. Luke, which I love, by the way.
It's the name Addie gives him.
It's the name Addie gives him. It's like Lucifer, but like Luke. I don't know.
Luke.
Yeah, love it.
She's French. It's set in a very French accent. Yeah. We listened to the Audible version of it. So
right. And so, but she has fallen in love with him, and she is like, this is what I've been living for. This is what I've wanted back in the day when I made the deal in the first place, is because I didn't want to marry someone I didn't love, and I love him. And in order to save his life, she has to make another deal with the devil that basically she will spend eternity with Luke to save her lover's life, essentially.
Save Henry's life.
And that is the ultimate sacrifice for love, right? And I really appreciated that even though it had an unexpected ending, it stayed true to who she was.
It did.
And it had a really nice flow. And I really like how she's basically trying to trick Luke all the way throughout the book, and even towards the end and in death she still does. And I appreciated it a lot, the ending.
And the writing, the writing was beautiful. The prose was beautiful in the book, which very much fit with this whole immortal life of Addie LaRue. Like,
Yes.
it was very poetic, very...
Absolutely.
I don't know.
What do you think of the ending?
I liked the ending, because there is this point where Henry and Addie are, like, writing out his life story, and then Henry publishes it. And basically, in, like, the dedication, he's just like, I remember you. And that was, like, this theme throughout the whole book was not being remembered. And so that little bit at the end was very...
Right.
It hit home, I feel like.
Yes. And I can totally understand why people are raving about this book, because you have the themes that are portrayed throughout this book in many different modalities, right? You have how the writing is very poetic, and how the writing is the time is kind of fluid, like it goes back and forth and it jumps a lot, and then all of a sudden, as soon as she starts to meet him and fall in love, it kind of goes forward from there of how she writes it.
Yeah, it does.
And I could totally see how beautifully and poetic the writing style is, the lives they lead, how she is really just wants to be remembered, and how love is remembering, right? And so it has the themes are very consistent and are portrayed through different modalities, like I said. And at the end, it is just one gift of love. Even though it doesn't end like perfect, happily ever after, it's still, you know, wrapped up and tied with a bow at the end, essentially. And it kind of lets us reflect as the readers of what life is for us, what love is for us. How would it be if nobody in our lives remembered us? What is our footprint that we're leaving on in life? And so I totally understand why there's so many people who are relating and feeling both for the characters in the book and for the themes in the book and how it ends. I really like it a lot.
No, it was an absolutely great book, because these themes of relationships and these relationships needing to be real and concrete and true are something that both Henry and Addie are lacking. And so when they finally come together and they can have this sort of relationship that they've been looking for, it's really well done.
And at the very end with Henry, like, he, correct me if I'm wrong, Carly, because it has been a little bit, but Henry made the deal because he didn't feel like
he was enough.
Nobody appreciated him, right?
Well, he didn't feel like he was enough for anybody. And so he just wanted to be enough, essentially. And so he made this deal where everyone who saw him, they looked at him, they saw the person, essentially, that they loved the most. Essentially.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And then all of a sudden, he realizes that all the people that claimed to love him and claimed that he were enough, that's not what he was actually looking for.
They didn't actually see him. They saw this version of him that they wanted to see.
Exactly. And then when he met Addie, he fell in love because she was enough. She was enough for him.
And she saw him.
And she saw him, not some random mirage that this magic is portraying, but she saw who he truly was. And so they both fell in love with each other. And he even mentioned or said at the very end, like, his short time of left was worth it in his life because he met the one person that mattered and saw him. Mm-hmm. And going throughout his whole entire life and not finding that one person would be emptyless life. And so they both had the same understandings of what life was and what love was and how it mattered. And they were perfect for each other, and it ended beautifully. Although great. A little bit sad.
A little bit sad.
Yeah.
But it was a really good ending. I liked it. Very good.
And it's really hard for an author to write a complete story with the ups and the downs of a book in one novel. It's hard, right? Because you have to be very talented as an author to put all that in one book and not have to build super a lot and have a really good beginning, middle, and end.
Yes. So tell us what you think, what you thought of this very popular book. All right, so what would you rate the book?
I would rate it an A for sure. Probably like a 94?
94?
Yeah, what about you?
I'd probably leave it at about a 90.
90, okay, so you want to, we'll do like compromise in like 92?
92 sounds good.
Very good. I actually think this would be a really good book to reread again in like a couple years. After you've forgotten all of this and like...
I feel like it's a book that'll age well.
Yes.
So.
Very well. Very good.
That's what you think.
Bye.
Bye.